Greetings again. We're back with part 2 of a conversation with Matt Cooper from Paw, Michigan, who was part of a national story and a very significant story put together in the book. And Matt, I want you to take just a second and once again go over, if you want to hold the book up, just introduce the book again, where people might get it, and I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the technicalities and the raw issues that are contained in it. But go ahead and make clear how people can get this and what it's about.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be back again for another part, and for taking a moment and talking about the book. I really appreciate that opportunity. I'm just always just so touched with how incredible of a job Sean Hollins did with the cover. He's right here in Kalamazoo, Fortitude Graphic Design and Printing, and with Season Press with Sonia Hollins. You know, she did an incredible job publishing it. And I need to thank also, I didn't do this the last episode, and I'm just doing that as I'm looking at the cover, that Colonel Odom, I talked about John S. Odom
Yes.
Jr. When he was a colonel in the Pentagon. Colonel Odom wrote the foreword for me on this book. And I also have Brigadier General Michael McDaniel, who wrote some nice words on the back. So it's an incredible product, I think, that people put out, and I've appreciated your kind words on the job that I did writing it. But in Kalamazoo here, anybody can go to Amazon, and you put in the search window Matthew Cooper, The Soldier's Home, and it comes to your door in a couple days. If you want to go to Kazoo Books in Kalamazoo, there's 2 locations, I think on West Main and Parkview. Kazoo Books, they're carrying it. They're kind enough to do that for me, as well as the Michigan News Agency right downtown Kalamazoo. They have it. And of course, back in Paw, my shampoo hut.
Right.
And Terry's nice enough to carry it. And
Is it an ebook, Matt?
Yeah, it's Kindle.
Okay, that's an ebook.
But you
Kindle,
can
yeah.
get the cover like this, or you can go to the Kindle.
Okay.
But
download the ebook.
Yeah, Walton Marie's is a nice store out by Lake Cora in
Right.
Paw, and they're nice enough to carry it. I mean, it's nice having that support and the fun. And Lowry's Books and Three Rivers and
Okay.
Sturgis, and I'm imploring people out there, if you know anyone at Tailwinds at the Kalamazoo Airport.
Okay.
I think Hometown Books should have the Hometown Airport carrying the book there at the front for people coming and going. But I've appreciated your.
Well, I say it's a great story, not a happy story, but it's a great story in what you do to accomplish what you wanted to do.
Thanks.
As we said before, there are people that feel they're grieved and they look for an attorney. Everybody feels that their situation is significant, and when something bad happens, as we talked in between, off the air, as we talked in between the segments, a huge part of this story is a central figure, James Hurley. This is a salt of the earth American. When you use the word nice guy, sometimes it doesn't seem to, we like bigger adjectives and superlatives. Nice guy goes a long way with this. This was a kind of a self-made guy, man who worked for everything he had, loved by his employee, held in high regard both professionally at his job and with his friends and neighbors and family, doing everything right the American way, and in some cases more, taking in a woman that had children, heart big as the all outdoors, so to speak, to the point that he ran into trouble through no fault of his own. You can't put a demerit on the guy. And that's one of the reasons, as I read the book and learned the story, I was so incensed. As you said earlier, some people got so angry at points
Well, you said that so fast. He ran into trouble at no fault of his own.
Right.
He ran into trouble. I mean, there was an illegal foreclosure.
Correct.
So there was no fault of his own.
No,
These defendants completely violated the federal
Right.
laws that are set for our service
Right.
members. And so when you talk about him being the salt of the earth, I think about the homestead that he made and how he was taking care of his mother while he was in Iraq. Setting her up with the food that was going to be
and made
necessary.
provision for all
Right.
that consequence before he left.
Right. And
Like, here's what I got to do.
Right.
Here's where I'm going. I'm going to do this, do that.
He's an incredible person. And
Yeah.
then when you see what happens to him, but the 2 things that I think about really is the way the defendants tried to disparage him and tried to say, oh, he wasn't liked at his job before he
Right.
left for Iraq. How could you say that when I tell that story about how
Right.
everyone is fleeing the building. He worked at a cheese factory. Everybody is fleeing the building. Sergeant Hurley is going back in, and there was an actual employee, it was a woman that had been overcome by fumes, and he carried her to safety.
Right.
How incredible is that?
Yeah.
That's the kind of guy you're talking about.
And I want to talk about these two things because they're critical to it without giving away the story. But first of all, key to this is the illegal act, and it revolves around a mortgage servicing firm that represents a large institution, started with a piece of paper that somebody got in the system and completely fraudulently, a responsible, authoritative person, so to speak, an attorney, I guess, signed a piece of paper that said, this guy is not on active duty in the military service and therefore is not afforded these protections. That started the whole chain of events, and it was illegal on its face, was it not?
Right, and not only that, but they did it in a non-judicial manner.
Right.
And under the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, the
Right.
SCRA, you cannot foreclose in a non-judicial fashion.
Right.
And
That means to laymen going through court proceedings and things. There are some judicial ones where you've got to make your case, go get your relief, get permission by the judge to proceed. There's another
Right.
process where the procedures are so set that if you can check this, everything's in order, you can do it non-judicially. Am I close?
yeah,
Yeah.
you could do it judicially,
Right.
but we should just, I think, look more at the bigger picture here and think about what these defendants did from the beginning.
That's what I want to get at.
Illegally
Yeah.
through, think about this, how in the first segment we talked a little bit about the 2015 Judge's Guide and the foundation and the work I'm trying to do. We didn't say this in the previous show. Imagine this was the first time in the history of our nation that a jury was seated to hear a violation of like this.
Right.
So is it really a pioneering of a whole new area of law? Is it because we now have soldiers more like Lincoln soldiers? Or is it because of a societal thing of how banks are dealing with service members? I don't know. All I know is the acts that were taken were illegal. And then once we start getting into this illegal hodgepodge of how they did this to him, we get into the judicial system.
Right.
And, you know, the reason the original Judge's Guide cited Hurley for the proposition that you cannot bring a private right of action was because Quist threw the case out.
Right.
So there was case precedent.
Quist being the first judge of
Judge Quist, where he,
jurisdiction, yeah.
well, actually, we went through 4 or 5 judges.
Right, he's the
but
first one to hear it.
He's the one that really got into it to that extent.
Right.
And actually seated a jury to hear the case. And, you know, to think an attorney in 2011 is involved in something that involved the first jury trial of its kind.
Mhm.
And then, not only did Hurley result in congressional amendments to the act that protects all of our soldiers, he opened that door to where the Department of Justice was able to obtain the largest SCRA settlement in their history. Tom Perez, who's Secretary of Labor, he's currently in Obama's cabinet.
I worked for Mr. Perez. I retired from the Department of Labor.
Well, when he was getting bipartisan support for that appointment,
Right.
he cited Hurley
Mhm.
as what allowed them to get the settlement they got.
Mhm.
How incredible is that? That Hurley resulted in congressional amendments, resulted in the SCRA getting these massive settlements that now every state in our country has departments of Veterans Affairs, and most of those in each county, like in Michigan, in each county, there's a Department of Veterans Affairs, and a lot of that was funding through that national settlement that the Department of Justice got because of what Hurley did.
And we talked about this even before we started in the first segment, just you and I visiting. As a citizen, a couple of things that occur to me, and I'll just 2 quick questions. One is why the JAG office and the military lawyers could not take up his case and quell this in a hurry. The second thing is, it talks in there about, as you said, the results of this lawsuit were large settlements, Justice Department. Would the Justice Department and the administration been able to brag about those things had it not been for this case? They weren't doing it on their own. They hadn't taken up the cause before, had they not?
It wouldn't have happened because it was happening to thousands of soldiers.
Correct.
It was my understanding that the Department of Justice followed me for 2 years. And when I
Okay.
say followed me in the case. The case took 5 years.
Right.
The last 2 years of that, and I talk about a little bit how they wanted to work with us in developing a national settlement.
Right.
But why is Matt Cooper laying this groundwork? And
That's my
where,
question.
that's where,
Where is our
obviously I'd like to sell a lot of books,
Sure.
but tell me how every person at Quantico or West Point that's studying to be an attorney that's helping our service members don't read this book. Because that was part of the problem, where Sergeant Hurley's going to a JAG officer and he's just saying, don't worry about it. They can't do this to you. Don't worry, they
Right.
can't do this to you. He comes home. Matt Cooper tries to go to Lansing to get some help. There's no help for me there. I got the help that I needed contacting Colonel Odom and just forging forward on my own. Why is it like that? It shouldn't be like that.
Well, that's my point as a citizen, and I mean, you know, our politicians tend to take credit for things. Somewhere, I'm sure now someone from the administration can come out and say, you know, we did this and that and got some of the largest. They didn't do it, you did. You and Hurley did, and they reacted to it and benefited from the decision. They did not pioneer it. They didn't champion your cause. They were not protecting soldiers prior to this, is my point, and that angers me a little bit. The second thing is, you talk about, for those listening, you're referring to Deutsche Bank and the other people as defendants. Just to be clear, Hurley wasn't under legal action except for losing his house. You took legal action against these people and they became defendants in this case.
Yeah, when he came home, his house was gone.
Right.
Imagine.
So these people were the defendants in your case.
Yeah, so what you just said, what I thought when you were
That's right.
talking was, wouldn't it be neat if somehow we got word to Tom Perez, because he was cited in the Huffington Post
Right.
saying, nobody cared about Sergeant James Hurley, but I did, meaning himself.
And he
But
didn't until this was already
I've
ongoing.
sent him the link to
Yeah.
this book. You think he's bought the book?
I don't know.
You think Tom Perez will look at my book when he claimed,
Right.
you know, hey, he did a great thing. He got these
Right.
national settlements. I can't begrudge him that.
I-
But he
I as-
needs to read the book.
I as an ex-serviceman and a parent, I've got 2 young people in the military, both been deployed 2 and 3 times. And I look at this, and the first thing that occurred to me, and I asked you the question before, but I ask it sort of hypothetically just to get the point out. The second time his mother went to JAG and said, we gotta go to court again, they repeat, don't worry, they can't do this to you. The second time she went, somebody said, wait a minute, somebody should have said, I'll go with you. We gotta stop this right now. There wasn't a systemic way that the military with authority stepped in and protected these soldiers.
Right, and I think.
There was not.
But
correct?
I think that's correct, but
Yeah.
I think it was a product of how this all happened, because I think that helps explain why in 2011 we have the first jury seated to hear a case like this,
Right.
because what was going on in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, was there compliance?
Right.
Or were there violations?
Well,
I don't know, maybe there were and we just didn't know about it.
But your court action was a result of a Defense Department and a military and a JAG system not protecting these soldiers. And as you talk at the end of the book, there's statistics on how many others there were. He wasn't the only one. Now, in retrospect, there were other people that were affected by this.
Well, think about it, at that time,
Yeah.
what we had was the shield.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, those JAG officers should have said, hey, we need to do something to protect
Right,
him.
right.
Because maybe something is happening to him back home.
right.
I don't know.
I think it's shameful politically. I'll tell you, and again, I'm speaking not for you. I'm speaking my impression as a military person, as a family member. I've watched political animals, if you will, and I'll sidestep here just to make my point, but I've often said this. If you look at the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, their last statements were, we do this to protect our own interests and keep our fortunes together. We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And if you read what happened to them, it was dramatic. Many of them lost everything. You fast forward today to a politician, and I stood with one and said, you know what you guys should do, meaning suggest, who laughed at me, kind of smiled and said, if I did that, I'll never get reelected. So their fear is, that's their biggest price to pay.
Yeah.
Now, your son, my son, they're out there at the point of the spear, in harm's way, sent there by their government, with potentially their life on the line. I don't want to hear the JAG officer or politician or somebody says, this is too hot to handle, let's wait and see what happens. I'm just saying, not for you, Matt, for me, it's a disgrace that you had to do this. I laud you for doing it. I think it's a disgrace that you had to do it.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. I've tried to not, there
I
were so
understand
many
that.
things here that frustrated me.
That's why I want to say it.
I tried to look at the idea that this wasn't about being a Democrat or a Republican. It was about being an American.
I agree.
And with the regrets that I've had about my non-service, I can tell you one of the proudest moments in my life came this year when I got to go out to San Diego and watch my little boy become a Marine.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an incredible, moving experience. I've never been more proud of my son, Drew Cooper.
It's quite a ceremony, isn't it?
He's a Marine.
Yeah, well, they bring him in,
That's
it's quite a
incredible.
ceremony. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. I went back and watched one, and after 30, 40 years, I graduated from that same parade deck during Vietnam, so I know what you're talking about. But again, I don't want to hear, as you say, a Tom Perez or anybody else put in their resume that these are some of the things we accomplished on my watch. No, you didn't. Second thing is, what happens in here, and I wanted to ask you as an attorney, and this is, I guess, a procedural question.
Well, before
Yep,
you
go ahead,
jump ahead, when you're talking about why did I have to do that, and how, one day, you know, in the epilogue, I talk about all these other soldiers I'm representing,
Right.
and these other cases that I'm struggling with, trying to educate the judiciary on what these rights mean. And yeah, they can sometimes be an extraordinary right, but it's because look who it's for, and they need to follow the law. And so that's part of my struggle right now.
Yep.
But it's, one day I was reading an article in a legal treatise magazine, and I wanted to talk to the writer of that. And so I learned that he works at the Department of Justice. And so I called the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and I want to talk to that writer. And you know how when you call someplace and that person's not there anymore and you get bounced around? And so finally, after about the fourth or fifth person picking up the phone, it's a lady, and she says, "Is this Matt Cooper?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Matt Cooper that did the Hurley case." I'd never said that when I made the call. And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Matt, I just want to tell you that us at the Department of Justice want to thank you for what you've done. You really pioneered this area of the law. And because of what you did, it laid the groundwork for what we were able to accomplish at the Department of Justice." You know, of course, I'm set back by that. It's like, wow, isn't that nice of you to say? It's the director of the Department of Justice.
Oh, okay.
She heard my name being bounced around out there, picked up the phone. And how nice of her to say that.
Sure.
So I don't want to come. I share your frustration because I felt it and I lived it.
Oh, I know.
But I've tried to come to terms with why did that happen, and it was a product of our times. I don't know the culture we're in. I don't know. But I'm trying through this book to get the veterans, to get an understanding from society, to get our active duty personnel, their rights understood, and to not ever allow this to happen again.
Mm-hmm. And I know, and that's your take from it. And as you say, you can feel my frustrations. My frustrations were in 2.5 hours of reading it. I can't imagine what 5 hours of
5 years.
5 years, excuse me, 5 years. I wanted to ask another thing, and not giving away, but there are laws of evidence, there are procedurals, there are motions. I mean, it's a very structured environment in the law, as you do in layman's terms, do a great job of painting. But one of the things that entered into this was disparaging, as you mentioned, this individual. How does that come about in a trial? Can you just make things up that, I mean, some of the things that were said that you finally countered, but what's the legal rule? Can I go in and say, gosh, did you know he's a child molester from California? Is there any restriction on, this was right out of left field to take this guy and try to disparage his character?
Well, in the book I talk a little bit about Jim Ford, and Jim Ford would quickly point out that, yeah, you can say or do anything you want. Mm-hmm. And the judges have such power that it just takes a slip of their thumb on how they want to rule, mm-hmm. how they perceive things. And in the book I talk about, you know, Kalamazoo is very fortunate. We've had a great bench here in years past, like with Judge Schaefer, Foley, Lamb. You know, and now we have a great bench here in Kalamazoo with Judges Bell and Lightvote and Jaguar and, you know, Santoni. I mean, the list goes on. There's a great bench in Kalamazoo. We're fortunate. But there's that ability to have the slip of the thumb or say or do anything you want. And there's one of my favorite cases. It's from a judge in Grand Rapids, Judge Kalinda. And the case was Traxler versus Ford Motor Company. Mm-hmm. And the Traxlers filed a motion for default because, like what you're talking about, the evidentiary rules and the rules of what goes on during a case and discovery. Ford Motor Company had so violated those rules, Judge Kalinda started out his opinion by saying the truth. What is the truth? That's supposed to be what our judicial system's about on these types of cases. And he then goes into talking about how Ford so violated those rules that he was going to default them, that they could no longer participate in the system that was going on.
You've lost all credibility.
And so, yeah, we're talking about 5 years of litigation. You like reading the John Grisham fiction? This is
a true story.
Didn't it take more turns and make you more angry?
Fact is often better than fiction, and this was it.
And that's what it was. We filed a motion to have them defaulted because they had so violated the rules of everything that our court system stands for. And you were talking about some more of the specific examples, but.
Well, I just saw at one point in time, we had talked about the core subject to this, or the main characters in this were the Hurley family and his mother. And you did a nice job of just laying out the story up to that point. He brought his mother in, and there didn't seem to be.
Well, I talking about the mother, I remember after her deposition, and I don't know if I had that in the book or not, where after her deposition, the bank's attorney cornered me, and she's like, now more than ever, you should agree to dismiss this case.
That was in the book.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? Now more than ever, I feel so strongly about this case.
Right.
I mean, it was very simple. They did a non-judicial foreclosure in violation of the SCRA, and they now want me to dismiss the case. You know, they violated the SCRA. What more do you need to do? Judge Quist threw the case out based on those arguments they had. So as ridiculous as I thought they were at one time, Judge Quist bought into them, right?
Right. And then
How
turned around.
devastating is that?
And that was one of the frustrations.
So I got involved with wanting to help Sergeant Hurley because I wanted to try to help somebody.
Yeah.
And now I got an opinion that becomes the subject of a judge's guide that stands for the precedent. So I didn't just not help somebody, I hurt all of the men and women serving in our military.
Yeah, that's true.
That was
I remember
devastating.
you mentioned that. You were
That was
concerned.
devastating.
You were concerned. If it left it that way, that gave defense and relief from everybody that was in any bank that was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were class action lawsuits just sitting on hold in South Carolina,
Right.
waiting to see what happened with the Hurley case.
Right.
Because we needed to clean it up. And that's where, I had also sued for a conversion case. And luckily I did, because otherwise the whole thing would have been thrown out. Because when he dismissed all of the SCRA counts, we wanted to go to the Court of Appeals at that point. But before we did that, we actually filed a motion for reconsideration, asked Judge Quist to reconsider what he did. And he wouldn't reconsider it. So then we asked, well, can we have permission to go to the Court of Appeals?
I found that interesting. You got to ask
isn't that
the person.
incredible?
You have to ask the person that you're in direct opposition with. I mean, he's the. If
Yeah,
you
the
can
judge
go
we
past
want
him.
to appeal, we got to ask for permission
can
from
do
him
it.
if we can go to the
Yeah.
appeals court.
That's an extraordinary
And-
feature in our law system.
But isn't it incredible that
Yeah.
he denied
Yeah.
that motion, because then he reversed himself
Yeah.
on the motion for the original
It's-
motion.
yeah.
So he reinstated it on his own.
What's also interesting too is at the very beginning of it, and I forget the first jurist or whoever, but I think it was a female or something. The very first time you presented this, she scolded the other people and said, "You really screwed this up, and you better correct it."
Yeah,
And you go on 5 more years,
when I first filed this case,
Okay.
I filed in Detroit.
right?
And Judge Edmonds, wonderful judge in Detroit, federal judge in downtown Detroit, what did she say? You said it. Someone has screwed up badly here. You need to make it right, and you need to make it right fast.
You better fix this.
That was in the first few months of me filing that case.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm looking good now.
Yep.
Finally, I got a judge that's willing to listen and do
Right.
something. So what's the first thing the defendants do? Well, they don't want that judge involved in
They
this
move.
case anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, they moved the case.
And you talk too, I want to say a John Grisham novel, and it's not necessarily intrigue, but you talk about considering cultures and places where you were, cities that you were trying this in, and I thought it was very astute, because I know this different communities and kind of what they are. But you actually had to consider those, or wondered if you should consider those as you proceeded, because of the identity of the culture and the judges and for instance, you describe, I was going to ask you this, I'm glad it came back. You describe as Grand Rapids, Michigan as a banking center. I wasn't aware of that was ever thought of that way. There are a lot of banks that are
Oh, I
housed
think
there?
so, yeah, I think they are a banking center
I
of the
didn't know.
Midwest,
Yeah.
yeah, that's,
Okay.
you drive through that S-curve on 131, and those big, beautiful buildings, a lot of those are,
Okay.
you know, the home offices of big banks.
And that concerns you, taking a banking issue up in that area? Or you wondered if you should concern you? I mean,
Well, it's a conservative
yeah.
area. I mean, I filed in Detroit because that's the Eastern District of Michigan, and that's where the defendants from the law firm were.
mhm.
And so I thought that was the most appropriate venue. When they did their motion for change of venue, they had reasons why they wanted to move it.
Mhm.
None of those reasons came to fruition. You know, like,
Right.
well, Judge, we might have to have the jury see the property. We never went out and looked at the
Right.
property. I mean, there was a lot of reasons, and none of them came through. They just wanted out of Detroit because of what Judge Edmonds said,
Right,
and bring it over here where it's more conservative.
right. And you reference in the book, and you are referencing other authoritative people. I wanna make
Judge
it-
Kalinda's from Grand Rapids,
Yeah,
that Traxler
right,
case I talked
right.
about. I mean, I like Grand
Right,
Rapids.
Right. But you mention in the book too, and I'll make it clear that these are not your words, so just don't anybody come to him and say he's slighting the judicial system. But as a footnote, so to speak, when you're concerned about these things, there were some other people, including Judge Weaver, who in her first words, and some other people that said, and I'm interested as a citizen in this, you brought this up third party, I'm not putting it on you, but you quote what I would guess are some pretty authoritative people, that the judicial system as a whole in Michigan is a little suspect compared with other states. Is that true?
Well, that's what she
That-
says in
they're
her,
saying, yeah.
she put out a book called Judicial Deceit.
Okay.
And I read that book, and in her book, she references Jim Ford.
Okay.
And that's how I ended up reading Jim Ford's book.
Okay.
He's got a book out, and it's, I lived in those times. It's a wonderful story about the Ford family and multiple generations. But they really are experienced people, and so I was looking to see what they had to say about this.
Right.
Because again, I was trying to come to terms with how did this take 5 years? What was going on with our system?
You
and
start
our
to look at
culture,
everything, yeah.
And so, I don't know if, I would truly hope that if someone was a Republican, they would feel like an American reading this book.
Right.
If someone was a Democrat, they're not gonna be mad at me, they're gonna feel like an American reading this book. Because I don't think it's political.
Well,
But I
and
think somebody
we
might,
citizens think that's the way it is.
yeah,
You know, the law's the law. That's what allows me to take on the, General Motors or something. And not so when you consider other factors, which you have to do. Yeah, but we naively think, well, this is the law, you know.
well, I do have a concern about, you know, the judiciary. I'm involved with it a lot, and you gotta go to it for this. It's the third branch of our government. And so we have, what do we have? The legislative, the executive, and the
And the
judiciary. But the citizens, society's not so
Got a couple minutes
much
left.
involved with the judiciary.
Yeah, right.
And so there needs to be attention drawn to it, because again, why did this take 5 years?
Mhm.
Why did Judge Quist throw the case out? Wikipedia lists Judge Quist's most significant case as the Hurley case,
As if it's a credit.
a case that he threw out a couple times.
As if it's a
You know?
credit to it, yeah. And we talked about that earlier, how these, I'm sure the Justice Department on somebody's resume here is gonna say, during our term, we did this. It's a whale of a story. We got about a minute left. It's a whale of a story. And again, it's not so heavy as a Grisham novel, but if you like reading them, this is a lay book that I think you did a beautiful job of taking. There are technical things. You talk about motions and stuff, but the motion becomes an element in the story of frustration and what we had to do next and where we went. I think you do a beautiful job of putting this story in layman terms. There's a lot more. I'm sure the motions themselves were several pages and they cited previous things. That's all very technical. But I think you referenced the motions on their face. Anything you want to say? We got about 50 seconds left, but
Well,
I want to thank you for doing
Well,
this.
thank you, thank you. I mean, obviously, I want people to buy my book,
Right.
but, you know, Jim Ford, take a look at his book. Great book, he's got great things to say. Justice Weaver, Judicial Deceit,
Right.
if you want to see something about the judiciary, and particularly Michigan. But how about having your viewers contact Tom Perez and tell him he needs to read this book, you know?
Right.
I mean, I think everyone studying at Quantico now needs to read the book. They
Oh, I
study
agree.
the Hurley case.
That is a
and so-
basic right of servicemen that they
Yeah.
deploy, period. Yeah.
And so it needs to be out there, so I appreciate you helping me with that.
Oh, we're going to continue. Thank you.
Thank you,
And thanks for what you did, period, just on this case.
thank you
Yeah.
for your service.